Hello, and welcome back to Birdeye Live, the show dedicated to learning how brands drive visibility, trust, and growth in a rapidly changing digital landscape. I'm your host, Justin Meredith, and here we learn from industry experts about the how and the why behind modern brand discovery, from traditional search and reviews to AI driven experiences that influence where customers choose to engage next. If you're tuning in live, feel free to say hello in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll jump right into today's discussion. And so today we are going to break down how AI systems like ChatGPT and voice assistants, maps, decide which local businesses to recommend, what signals actually influence that visibility, and we'll cover how reviews, the way you respond, your listings data, and how all these different elements shape your brand inside AI-powered search. So you know exactly what to prioritize and how to approach the AI search landscape, so to speak, in 2026. And so to help with this, we're going to take a look back at some of the best highlights and advice from our recent webinar with Jim Chappell, who is the Senior Director of Business Development at Yelp. And in that webinar, we had that just last week. And we talked for an hour, and he gave all kinds of great advice on not even just how Yelp's data is being used in AI search, but also just how the AI search ecosystem works and the different elements that actually come into play when it comes to, you know, how these AI programs recommend businesses. Joining us is always Sirit Singh. Welcome, Sirit. Thank you for joining. And I understand you've got some highlight clips to show us, and we'll go through those.
Absolutely. Thank you, Justin. So the highlights that I've picked for today, they cover, the key questions that, teams ask all the time in this current marketing landscape. So what AI is picking up about your brand, how reviews shape what customers see and what they trust online, and finally what you can do about all of this without overcomplicating it. So for whoever's tuning in, you'll probably find a few ideas that you can resonate with and start using right away. So yeah, I think we can just dive into the first clip right then. I'll just give you a brief introduction about the clip. So a lot of teams, they still think Yelp only matters if someone opens the Yelp app, right? In this clip, Jim explains where this Yelp data shows up across other products. So, including a new example where he, talks a little bit about how AI is also playing into this, and you should listen for why these changes, why all of this changes the stakes for your location info and reviews. So,
Awesome.
let's dive in. Yeah.
Cool. Let's take a look.
One of the big, I think, misnomers is that people are like, oh, I'm not using Yelp. And what they don't realize is Yelp is actually behind the local discovery of a lot of the products and services that we're all using in our everyday life. We announced last week in our earnings that we just entered into a partnership with OpenAI, where they're going to be actually integrating all of the Yelp location data and reviews into ChatGPT. But we're also behind the location data behind Apple Maps and Siri. So thinking about, I'm a CarPlay user, being able to interact with local businesses via CarPlay, Amazon Alexa and Alexa Plus, Perplexity, Microsoft Bing and Copilot, Yahoo, DuckDuckGo. And then also if you're driving a Ford, a BMW, Mercedes, Toyota, Audi, Porsche, or a Lincoln, Yelp's actual location data is in the onboard navigation systems for those automobiles, and then also the connected car platforms for Telenav and Garmin. So when you think about the value of our partner community and like Birdeye and the services that you're providing for your clients, the ability through one interface to be able to update the business location information one time, respond to your reviews, or be able to monitor your reviews, and then have that syndicate out is pretty impressive from that standpoint. And part of the reason we've been able to partner with these organizations is the way that we approach reviews from that standpoint. And I think you've got another slide in here that talks about it. Like we do get feedback. People are like, oh, well, people only come to review sites in order to deliver negative feedback. And like nothing could be from the truth. And you'll see here on this slide, more than 76% of the reviews on Yelp are actually greater than 3 stars, and more than half are 5 stars. So when you think about that opportunity, yes, your HVAC system may only break one time, but if you're an active Yelp user and you're finding restaurants and locksmiths, you still have a strong likelihood of leaving a review. And if you are a business owner or a brand manager responsible for responding to those reviews, that's a great way to have that snowball as well. Because what we found is that businesses that actively engage with consumers and respond to the reviews, the likelihood of them seeing, they could see anywhere from a half a star to a full star improvement over time, just by actually delivering empathetic and real responses to the reviews they're getting.
Yeah. And he brings up an interesting point, where a lot of business might say, I don't really use Yelp, and that's fine, but your customers don't have to actually be using Yelp to get the data that Yelp provides. And, as he said, they recently entered a partnership with OpenAI. So now we know that, Yelp reviews and data will be used in ChatGPT search. We also know that they're used in Apple Maps, as well as, as he was saying, with Siri, Alexa, Copilot, all the different car navigation systems, and
Absolutely.
all these different environments. And really, what I think it boils down to is that the ecosystem for Yelp is massive, and a lot of people are getting that data, whether you're actively managing it or not. But I also think it speaks to the larger ecosystem of how these AI searches really work, and the amount of data that they're combing over in order to provide a recommendation. And it's not even just Yelp data, but it's also your Google Business Profile, it's your website, it's your other, business listings, whether you're in a niche industry website, your Better Business Bureau, all of these places where your business is listed online are being considered whenever these AI searches are taking a look at your reputation, and it's basically trying to decide, like a person would, is this a business I could recommend? And the thing that has never really changed, even when it was with traditional Google search, was, is this business who they or is this business who they are, who they say they are? Are they located where they're located? Is the address correct? Are they open? And do they actually do what they say they do? Are the services, the categories, are those things accurate? And making sure that you are accurate across all of these different channels is extremely important, because if there is inconsistencies between these different sites, whether it's as simple as your hours, or your services are different, or maybe you have a slightly different name on your Google Business Profile than your Yelp profile, or if any of those things are inconsistent, it's not going to be confident in providing you as a business recommendation, because it doesn't actually know, like, okay, well, they say they're one thing here and a different thing there. I don't know if I should recommend them, because I can't trust that they are who they say they are. And
Absolutely.
so, even if they don't ever go, to your Google Business Profile, or they never go to your Yelp profile, that data still gets shown up in that AI search result. And so, I think just managing your reputation across all these different platforms is more important than ever. And
100%.
one of the myths that Jim was talking about too is, the idea that, especially for Yelp, that people may think, well, people only really go to Yelp to leave a negative review.
Yeah.
And from what he was saying is, like, that can't be further from the truth. 76% of reviews are 3 stars or higher, and over half of them are even higher than that. And it's not just a complaint box. It's really kind of a place for your reputation to be shown. And, it's clear, just, based on the recent announcement, and then just based on the data that we have seen from search results, those engines trust this customer feedback data. And so it's definitely something that the businesses need to be paying attention to and managing proactively.
100%. 100%. And I feel like you raise a great point about reputation, being on one platform. I think that's one thing that people miss often, is that your reputation and your information, they don't stay put on one platform, right? So then the next question becomes simple. If AI is pulling from all of these signals and giving customers a shorter list, then what is it actually looking at when it is recommending these businesses, right?
Mhm.
So that's what we talked about. So in the next clip now, Jim sort of breaks down how AI can feel like a black box from the business side. So, but also what signals are really driving these recommendations. So I think two keynotes here would be to listen for the profile basics that people can readily start working upon, claimed pages, hours, or and the second thing is the experience details. So let's cue the next clip and take a look.
So when an AI system generates these recommendations, what parts of a business's reputation or their brand are they actually looking at? What matters, to these AI systems?
Yeah, I think at the start, from a consumer perspective, feels really fantastic because you're getting exactly what you need really quickly. I could see where there might be some tension from a business owner or a brand perspective because it sort of feels a little bit like a black box from that standpoint. But when you think about the consumer queries that they're asking, those detailed questions, they don't have to ask for, plumber near me anymore or
Mhm.
um, restaurant near me. That it's changing how they're interacting from that standpoint. I think with partners like Birdeye, you guys make it really easy for your customers in order to take advantage of that at scale. So when you start thinking about things like making sure your page is claimed, the hours of operation are updated, there's beautiful photographs that depict what the experience looks like, whether it's the service offerings or menu items that are there. Reputation also impacts a lot as well. When you start thinking
Yeah.
about it, large language models on the AI side can ingest a tremendous amount of data and then identify the trends that are sort of inherently there from a platform like Yelp and the infrastructure that we provide. So when you start thinking about it, people aren't searching for, restaurant near me. They might be searching for the kid-friendly, gluten-free option that has great outdoor dining. And
Yeah.
some of those might not be, structured attributes that Birdeye is pushing to like a platform like Yelp. But if it's in review data, I'm a dog owner. It's like I've the outdoor dining in New York City. I've had businesses bring me bowl of water for my dog and bacon. If I'm reviewing that, like that's a great signal for dog friendly that can be picked up out of a review. So
Mhm.
thinking about your actual consumer reviews and your review responses, those are all additional signals that are actually helping
Yeah.
inform large language models and then helping package that up for consumers to meet the specific, most relevant inquiry that they have.
Yeah. And I think what Jim is saying is important. This, it may feel like a black box, but it's not random. And in a way, it doesn't even feel that groundbreaking because these AI systems are looking at the same signals that a customer would, right?
Yeah.
It's the thing that they've always cared about. It's the accuracy, the photos, reviews, responses, and things of the like. Um, but another interesting thing is that he is right. The search behavior has been changing, and this is something that we've seen, or we've talked about in past conversations, in other webinars with Greg Sterling and the data that he's been pulling in his surveys. People are searching in a more nuanced way, especially when they go to ChatGPT, Perplexity, AI mode. It's
Mhm.
never really just restaurant near me. It's it has nuance, it has context. And something that's interesting is these models are learning about its user, and so it remembers things too. So if you are a vegetarian and you are looking for a place for pizza delivery, it may take the fact that you're a vegetarian into consideration, even if you didn't mention it in your question. And so the searches and the way that these models are operating are way more nuanced than just you know pizza near me. And
Yeah.
all of that stuff is context. And the best place for these models to get that kind of context is in those reviews, because this is what real customers are saying about your business. it's, verified, in the sense of, okay, this person that went to this business said that they were a great, they had a great vegetarian pizza. And those things are, you can capture that in your website, content, but there's so much nuance that goes into it. And, the best place to get that nuance in that context is in your reviews. And so it's super important that's something that is prioritized by businesses and paid attention to, because, you never know what could come up, dog friendly, or, they had a great kids menu, and, all kinds of little things that maybe you don't think about, but matter to your customers, that they talk about in their reviews. And so,
Absolutely.
they're not just reading your star rating, they look at everything. Um, and so you can't
Absolutely.
really just treat these as just passive social proof. And this is true. This has been true for a long time, especially with local SEO. Customer reviews have always been a very powerful signal. But what's interesting is that the power that the reviews have seems to be increasing. And so I just think that's something that businesses need to think about, especially multi-location brands, or, that have, 500, 1,000 locations. This is something that will be, more important to prioritize and manage. And at scale, that challenge only compounds. So being able to manage that effectively is super important. And so I think the key takeaway from Jim is this, at least in the, from these first two clips, is make sure you have your listings claimed, keep your data accurate, improve, add photos, encourage detailed reviews, and respond thoughtfully. And maybe we'll get a little bit more into the responses as well. But, AI is forming an opinion about your brand, and business and people are making decisions based on that. And it's no longer just the 10 blue links plus, 3, Google, map pack options. It may only provide 2 or 3 options. And, they may, your customers may ask a follow-up about those. So it's really important in terms of your visibility to stay on top of this customer feedback, because it's a very, very powerful signal in these AI recommendations.
100%. And you rightly said that, we're going to dive more into the kind of review responses in that, shape consumer decision making now. So you rightly said that, customers are not always searching for, those simple searches anymore, dentists near me or restaurants near me. So they're describing in detail the situation, and they want the business that feels right for it. So the next clip now is a great example of how detailed prompts are changing what matters. And it's key to listen for how reviews and review responses can both signal things a profile usually won't. So like bedside manner or being good with anxious patients. So yeah, let's take a
Okay.
look.
Cool. Before we jump into that, I just want to say, Mohammed, I see you in the comments. Thanks for joining and watching live. But let's take a look at our next clip and listen to see what Jim has to say.
It's when you start thinking about the impact of reviews and review response, like as a consumer, if I'm going, I might not enter into a prompt with ChatGPT with like dentist near me, but a query could look like something like, hey, I need to go to the dentist. I need somebody who's really good with anxious patients. I haven't been in a while and I'm scared to death. Like in those instances, there's probably not a lot of information in the business profile that would actually be able to discern that, but that certainly signals that you could potentially get from reviews and review responses from patients that are talking about like their follow-up or their bedside manner from that standpoint. So that helps transform things that, in the past were potentially, dozens of search results where people were having to discern, to being able to actually deliver, the top 2 or 3 that actually have, that the LLMs have actually identified as sort of meeting that criteria with the review response.
Yeah. And, and this goes back to a little bit about the extra context and the nuance of the prompts that people are asking. But the important thing, that I'm taking away, and this is something that we talked a lot about in the discussion in the full interview with Jim, was the the way that you respond carries so much impact, especially in the minds of the people reading your reviews. Something that we talked about in the discussion was a lot of times when I'm looking at reviews, the first thing I'll look at, or the first thing I'll do, is sort by, lowest reviews first. Because for
Yeah,
me as a
me too.
customer, I want to know what is the worst that I can expect, and
Yeah,
go from there. And a lot of times when a business responds in a thoughtful, intentional, solution oriented way, is okay. Clearly, this person had a bad experience, but man, the business is paying attention and they're trying to make it
yeah,
right. They're making that effort and they care. A lot of times you'll see a lot of bot responses, and so you're like,
mm,
okay, well, clearly nobody's actually listening, or maybe they won't respond at all. And it really, from a conversion standpoint for me as a customer, I'm like, well, okay, so this just means that these people are having bad experiences, and there's nothing being done about it. There's no explanation, there's no extra context, and it does not shine a great light on the business. A lot of times when I read a negative review and a great response, my opinion is actually more positive of the business, more so than the negative review. So just being able to add that extra context to the situation carries a lot of weight, not just with these AI models. And I think the jury is still out on how much responses play a role in your ranking. I don't think it's at least in terms of traditional organic SEO, your responses never really did much. I think that's because they didn't want you to start cramming your review responses with a bunch of random keywords. But I know that at least in the sense of your customers who are reading those reviews, that matters. And maybe even from the SEO perspective, it's not even so much like what was in the response, but the fact that you did respond and showing, hey, showing Google, hey, this business is, or we're engaging, we're responding, we're paying attention, and maybe that carries an impact. Yeah. But one last thing too, actually, I just realized, is a lot of times too, when you respond in a really good way, there's a really, you
yeah,
know, high likelihood that that person could update their review. And so your ability to respond quickly and with, care could help
compassion.
reverse a
Yeah,
lot of negative reviews. And so I think that's also something that's very powerful.
absolutely. I agree. And I think so far, what we've done is we've covered the entire trajectory of how your reputation travels, right? Um, what AI reads and why responses can influence decisions. Now, for a close up, we've got some practical tips from Jim. It's a practical, actionable checklist that you can use, hand it to your team, and they can actually execute. So the basics still win here. So let's take a look.
Cool. From a best practices perspective, what are some of the things that you recommend businesses do to kind of put themselves in the best position to succeed?
Yeah, I think at its foundation, make sure your locations are claimed. So you'll see on Yelp, there'll be a blue check mark. It's essentially setting up your Yelp account and gives you the opportunity to take advantage of a lot of the free tools that exist in order to manage your page. Having your page claimed is a great opportunity because it sort of signifies that the lights are on and that consumers tend to interact with businesses that are claimed slightly more than unclaimed businesses. And then, like when you're working with a partner like Birdeye, it's really important to make sure your profile is robust, that you're adding photo content, you've added, about the business content, specialties, all of that information that you believe is important to convey to a consumer from that standpoint to set yourself apart, not only from other businesses, but to sort of leverage the ability to visually merchandise yourself, not just on Yelp, but then also the other partners that are actually leveraging that data in order to inform their own platforms. And then finally, watch your reviews. Take the reviews as feedback. What I would say is sometimes it can be tough. It might be honest feedback, but take it for what it's worth as it relates to feedback. we see higher levels of consumer engagement with a lot of our advertisers with 4-star rated businesses. And, I think, when we were prepping for this, our hypothesis is that it's because, human nature is like, nobody's perfect. And like a slightly lower rated business is probably more believable from that standpoint. And it's funny, you had mentioned earlier your sort of human nature and sort of looking at the 1-star rated businesses first. I do that as well. But even if I see a business that's gotten a couple negative reviews, when I actually see how the business owner or the person that responded to that review, I'm often interacting with businesses that still had some negative reviews from that standpoint, largely seeing the business owner or the review responder as a marketing opportunity. It's like, hey, what went wrong? How did you take the feedback, and how are you informing that on a go forward basis from that standpoint?
Yeah. And like you said, at the foundation, claim your listing. And that, I feel, is much more powerful than people realize. It's true
Yeah.
with Yelp, but it's also true with your Google Business Profile. And the first step once you claim it, you're able to say, okay, this is who I am or who we are as a brand. Like, this is our account, it's ours. So then that first signal, whenever, these engines are looking, is like, okay, I know that this account with these reviews and this information is for this business. So I can trust that. And like you said, it's not cosmetic. It signals legitimacy. Um, you know, his other tip for profile depth is not just your name and category, but they look at the full completeness. And this is true for,
Absolutely.
customers as well. Photos, your about section, the services, specialties, all of that creates dimensionality. The more context you can provide, the more accurately AI can match you with, those intent nuanced searches. In my opinion, is the more the better, right? Like, give it every opportunity to capture, any tidbit of information about your business that can be used in one of these nuanced searches. I like to think about it
Absolutely.
like this: like, a thin profile gives AI very little to work with. But if you give a lot of information, you provide a lot of data or about your business, and really just something that it can work with, it gives it a lot more opportunities to recommend your business.
Yeah.
And
This reminds me of a great example actually that Jim shared during the webinar. So he talked about, an HVAC use case and how somebody who's looking for services that, require people to come home, they would want to look at, a few photos and, profile depth again comes into play because when you're inviting somebody home, you'd want to make sure that um, they have that added layer of safety. So
yeah,
definitely.
definitely. Yeah, and I think it's easy for people to kind of put themselves, or to kind of lose the perspective of
Mhm.
their own, thought process or behavior when they're doing their own searches. Like, if you're looking at a business and you're looking at the pictures, what do you as a consumer want to see? Do you want to
Absolutely.
see the inside walls, the parking lot? What does the front look like? So I know that if I pull up, I know this is the place that I'm looking for. All of these little things, like, is it clean? Is there enough space for our big group to sit at? All these little things. The photos are massively helpful with that. Um,
Absolutely.
and AI can look at photos too. I don't know exactly how, if it's analyzing every single image, but I mean, even with traditional SEO, you'll see, if you were to search, in the old-fashioned way of, best cheeseburger near me, and you look at the map pack, it'll show images of the cheeseburger of those places. And so it's definitely, being picked up somewhere along along the line. And I think Jim made a subtle, important point, is that 4-star businesses often perform extremely well because they feel real. Consumers don't
Yeah.
expect perfection. There's a lot of people, if you were to look at a business and had a perfect 5-star rating and nothing was ever wrong, there is a
It was
sense of like, okay,
sufficient.
be a little
Yeah.
staged, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, and this is true, even we were noticing this with Google as well, as, those 4.6 to 7 to 8 star businesses perform really well because they're not perfect. but in a suspicious way, right? But it's really how you handle that imperfection. And Jim talked about the same thing that I mentioned before, but like the looking at it from the lowest ratings
Yeah,
first.
the lowest ratings
How,
first,
you know,
negative reviews first.
exactly. And so I think that's just something that's important to think about. And so when you have 500 to 1,000, or more locations, how are you managing the responses to those non-perfect ratings or even the perfect ones too? But, at scale, that's something that you really need to think about. And, he mentioned it in one of the earlier clips, like that's where Birdeye really shines. And he's right, because the ability to manage that customer feedback across that many locations, across that many channels, because it's not, like I said, it's not just Yelp, it's your Google business profile, it's your Yelp page, it's your Better Business Bureau, it's like if you're in services, Angie's List, you know uh, all the different healthcare types of pages, Facebook profiles, all of those things, compound. You get it, for every location, that's another profile for each of those channels. And so you have 500 locations, you could have 2,500 profiles to manage. And you get reviews in all different platforms and formats. And so how do you manage that effectively, eh, proactively? And you can't do it without a platform like Birdeye. And in today's world where things are moving faster, people are looking at things real quick, and you need to, act fast. You have to have a platform that can give you that real time insight, and then be able to actually use that insight to help improve the business, whether it's looking at trends in your reviews across the sentiment. So not even just like, okay, this location or these locations in this state have a lower average star rating, but actually analyzing the sentiment of the reviews of those locations to understand, okay, well, here's a very specific problem. Um, it's a really powerful thing to be able to have that level of insight, you know, from 1,000 location point of view down to the one location point of view, to dial in on what specifically is going on at every location in real time. And all of that, what I love about this whole ecosystem is that it all plays a part in that AI search ecosystem.
Yeah.
So if you want to rank higher on Google, if you want to show up on the map pack, if you want to show up in AI searches, it always, it all comes down to how you're managing your reputation across the board, whether it's social, your listings, and all of that. And so it's a really complex and beautiful ecosystem, but it all works together. And so if you have the right, you know, setup to manage that effectively, you can really see some incredible growth and success from that.
Absolutely. I
Awesome.
agree.
Well, I think we are getting at time, and thank you all for tuning in. If I highly recommend you go and check out the recording of that webinar and get the full, just like us, we're talking about context, get the full context of that conversation. It was a great hour with Jim. I think we have the link in the comments, so feel free to go and check that out. Also, please don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube page, especially, our YouTube page. We're working on promoting more content there. We're going to be
We're uploading
educational
fresh
videos
content every day.
every day.
Marketing insights. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Subscribe to our YouTube channel.
exactly. So like the highlights you just saw, we're posting those. We post from all our discussions, educational how-tos, and everything else. So feel free to do that and check us out on YouTube and follow us on LinkedIn. But I think that's all the time that we've got for today. Thank you, Sirit, for jumping on and showing us these highlights. And yeah, we'll see everybody. We'll see everybody on the next episode of Birdeye Live, which should be, hopefully in the not too far future, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But until then, we'll see you guys next time.
You're curious about using AI, but you don't want AI that puts your brand at risk. Because if the communication is inconsistent and non-compliant, you risk losing customers' trust. So, how do you authentically expand your hyperlocal business? Meet Brand and Industry AI from Birdeye. Your own custom AI models built to reflect your brand voice, understands your industry, and adapt to every location. Brand AI captures your unique voice. Industry AI brings the correct context. Together, they train AI agents that act on your behalf, consistently, intelligently, and always on brand. These AI agents don't just personalize content, they deliver outcomes that matter to your business. AI agents trained on brand and industry AI know the regulations that matter and respect them by design. Leading businesses across all industries are adopting AI built for them. And for teams managing hundreds of locations, custom LLMs tuned to the brand and industry redefine scale and consistency. This is not just automation. It's AI that speaks your brand and understands your industry. Your brand, your industry, your market. AI that acts for you on your terms. This is Brand and Industry AI.